recording? Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Kim Coleman Madsen, and I'm the Broadband Implementation Manager with the Governor's Office of Information Technology. We're going to go ahead and get started. May not last the full 2 hours, but just want to be respectful of your time. Ask that if you haven't, before you leave, if you could hit the sign-in sheet in the back to let us know you're here. Those on the phone, we're trying to capture your name on the Zoom meeting, but you can also email our team and tell us you're there. We want to capture your attendance as well. The restrooms are just out the hall to the right, and then they're on the left. And certainly encourage questions during the presentation. Don't feel like you need to hold them until the end, because we're going to be going over material that hopefully will pique your interest, and you'll want to have that question answered before we continue. So I am part of the FirstNet Colorado planning team. Our manager, Brian Shepard, is actually out today. That's the reason I'm giving the presentation, and have Ed Mills, Education and Outreach Manager, and Sarah Smith, our project coordinator, up here. And I'd like to go around the room and ask for introductions, just so we get an idea of who's here. Chief, can I start with you?
Jerry Rhodes, Cunningham Fire. Glenn Klein, State of Colorado. Gordy Olson, Fort Fire.
Monica Aiken, Sierra Wireless.
Marcus Lucero, AT&T FirstNet State Outreach.
Jesse Miller, Lakewood Emergency Management.
Ryan Fields, formerly with Aurora Fire, now with AT&T.
Start right here.
John Pickard, Lakewood Police Department Support Services Division.
Wayne Creasy, Office of Strategic Technologies, U.S. Marshals Service.
Matt Wendell with the Colorado Technology Association.
All right, let me jump there.
Hey, good morning. Chris Riley with FirstNet, formerly with Colorado Springs.
Scott Keller, North Central Region, Homeland Security.
Mark Wolf, Glendale Police Department. Bob Fager, Engagement Fire.
Gilbert Hunt, Sudan.
Sarah, and then Tracy, can I have you introduce yourself?
I'm Tracy Murdoch with FirstNet. Colorado liaison with Kim and the team for the last 2 years. Glad to be here.
Good. Hi. Do you mind?
Hi, Christy McCormick.
Hi, Christy. I hardly recognize you.
Hey, what are you doing? Thank you for that beauty. Yeah.
Well, Christy's have really long curly hair. It's hard. So, and I do want to let you all know the presentation is given by our team, but we will certainly ask AT&T and FirstNet to, offer comments or answer questions if they need to. And then are Randy or Emil on the phone?
Yes, both of them are.
Yes.
And Emil Ulbrich are the contractors with Signals Analytics that supported a lot of the work that you're going to see in this document, and I may refer to them for technical assistance as well if you all give me a Jeopardy question I can't answer. Go ahead and get started. So what we hope to achieve today is to provide you all a high-level overview of the state plan. And we'll go into the mechanics of where things are at from a planning perspective, but the state plan is the plan that AT&T and FirstNet have provided to the state of Colorado, just like they've done to all 56 states and territories. That tells us about the network that AT&T and FirstNet propose to build in the next 5 years in an opt-in decision by the governor. And just to take you all back a step to 5 years ago, this is based on legislation in the 2012 Spectrum Act that required FirstNet to be established and be responsible for operating or deploying, maintaining, operating the very first nationwide public safety broadband network. And so after 5 years of lots of planning, lots of outreach across the country, lots of outreach with all of you folks within the state, we're excited to be able to talk with you about the plan that they're proposing, the benefits and challenges we think that are associated with deploying into a state like Colorado. Not exactly geography here in the state to deal with. And then also for you all to understand not only the coverage implications, but the costs, the users, the network capabilities, devices, and other relevant topics. So really we want to spend the next hour and a half to 2 hours talking with you to ensure that you understand what's available from a public perspective, Also knowing that there is information available that's deeper and more comprehensive, and we can provide you access to that if you're a Colorado public safety stakeholder, so you understand what the implications are for the governor's decision, for public safety communications really in the next 25 years, as that's the length of the contract with AT&T. And also the implications for you as an agency as you consider whether you would adopt the FirstNet service if they are actually, if the governor selects to opt in the state and have AT&T and FirstNet build the network. And then also if the governor were to make an opt-out decision, the implications for that for Colorado as well. And we'll be talking about that in the last half of the deck. We do want to qualify that this information is publicly available on FirstNet.com. We are not presenting information that's available via the state plan portal. That portal, like I mentioned, is available to public safety users in Colorado. If you are interested in seeing that data, you can email our team and we can turn around with Tracy's help in about 24 to 36 hours access to that. So there is time for you to get access. What you will see in there is more comprehensive information on the deployment of the network across the country. You'll see more information on the network architecture, cybersecurity, and depending on your interest in what FirstNet and AT&T are doing, there's certainly value in seeing that. And I know there are some of you in here who are already authorized state plan portal users. So where are we in the FirstNet decision and timeline process? The final state plan was actually delivered to Colorado on September 19th. Now that did not trigger the governor's 90-day decision period because it was missing one item. In the legislation, it says that the NTIA, which is the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, and they're kind of the oversight agency a bit for FirstNet within the Department of Commerce, they were obligated to provide funding levels to the state in the case of an opt-out situation. We did not get those funding levels until September 29th, and so it was on the 29th that triggered the governor's statutory 90-day decision period. The funding levels, just so all of you are aware, and I'll hit on it again later, the funding level for Colorado is estimated to be between $70.8 million and $88.5 million. And what that means is in an opt-out situation, Colorado would be able to apply to the NTIA for those grant dollars to support capital expenditures as an investment in the network. We wouldn't be able to use that money for operations and maintenance. It would literally be only allowed to be used to build the network. That money would be available via a grant. Colorado would not be obligated to apply for it if they weren't interested, but that was a key element that the governor needed to know to assist in his decision and frankly assist in our program's assessment of what we think of the plan. So we have in the past, actually since June, in June we received an initial state plan and we have been actively seeking input from stakeholders like all of you over the past 4 months and now ongoing through the decision period, which you'll see at the bottom will be no later than December 28th. We've been going out kind of roadshow approach, our team oftentimes in partnership with AT&T and FirstNet to ensure that all of you understand the implications of this, as I mentioned earlier, and to give you the opportunity to let us know what you think. I'm going to go over how to provide us feedback later in the deck as well. We also have a governance body, the FirstNet Colorado governing body. That group is made up of 15 public safety and elected officials. It includes representation from all of our disciplines, police chiefs, fire chiefs, EMS community, sheriffs. It includes representation from both tribes. It includes representation from first responder organized labor, from rural Colorado, from state agencies like our office, OIT, the Department of Public Health and Environment, the Department of Public Safety. I'm sure I'm forgetting, CML, the Colorado Municipal League, and CCI, the County Commissioners, Inc. And all of those folks have been, frankly, they've been in place for almost 4 years now, which is pretty remarkable from a governance group. Not a single person has changed. And they are the group that has been providing our program direction monthly more than that, frankly, oftentimes weekly, about how they want outreach, education, and then synthesis of all of this data provided back to them so they can make a recommendation to the governor on the opt-in, opt-out choice that will be due on December 28th. That group, everything they talk about is generally publicly available. It's, we actually have a YouTube page where if you have any interest, you could go back and listen to their meetings and hear kind of as things have evolved through the decision-making process, and you're always welcome to participate in our meetings. They are the third Thursday of every month at 2:30, and in the next 2 months, I think that's going to be really important, especially if you're following. As I mentioned, the governor has a statutory requirement to make a decision no later than December 28th, and that decision, again, is whether to opt in and invite AT&T and FirstNet to build the network in the state, or to opt out, begin to step through a regulatory and procurement process that would require Colorado to build its very own public safety radio access network and connect back to the AT&T and FirstNet core. Any questions on the timeline as I've covered it so far? Okay. So, as we step through the state plan overview today, I want to remind you that the source information is with www.firstnet.com, which is a public website, and we are focusing on the data that's publicly available. Again, we do have a synthesis of data from the state plan portal that has authorized users only, and if you desire more information, we're happy to provide you access to that. As a result of the public information being not as comprehensive as the private portal information, we don't have concrete data that I can talk publicly about on lots of things, but we would encourage you to ask those questions, and then we can direct you whichever way is appropriate. And again, just belaboring the point, if you have interest, I can't answer the question, let us get you access to the state plan portal. We can talk more in depth about your questions. So quickly, an overview of the AT&T and FirstNet solution. AT&T was selected in March to become the partner for FirstNet. And FirstNet's RFP originally proposed a Band 14 network. Band 14 is the 20 megahertz of spectrum that was authorized by Congress and licensed to FirstNet for 25 years that they would be using to build out the public safety broadband network. That was a great thought. 20 megahertz public safety was very excited about having that. And then as AT&T stepped through the process and once they were selected, it was made publicly known that AT&T was going to actually expand that offering, which AT&T and FirstNet thought was a great benefit to public safety. And what they meant by that is AT&T was going to provide priority preemption access, which is kind of the linchpin of the initial thought of the public safety broadband network. They were going to offer that access across all 100 megahertz of their spectrum. So that's essentially what they're doing. AT&T's network is going to be available across the state. They're going to be expanding it. Where today public safety operates the same as a commercial user, now they will have default priority and preemption on the network, not only on the 100 megahertz of AT&T spectrum, but then on the additional Band 14 spectrum that's expanded on the network over the next 5 years. Priority and preemption access will be provided at no additional cost to public safety's primary folks, who are law enforcement, fire, EMS, 911, and emergency management. And so that's a great benefit because no longer will public safety be out. I think of the example given in Douglas County where you have an officer driving through an area around 3 o'clock in the afternoon when all the kids are getting out of school, and his ability to access the network and transact on his computer system is limited because all those kids are out and we see increased usage in the area. So that's really a great benefit that's being offered by AT&T and FirstNet. And I'll go into secondary users later on. For folks that are not in that initial kind of description of first responders, there will be the ability to have priority access on the network in certain instances and at an additional cost if it's desired as well. The AT&T and FirstNet solution also provides access to what is going to be a nationwide dedicated public safety evolved packet core EPC. That core will be available in the spring of 2018, And essentially what that means is public safety, when they do transactions on the AT&T network, they are going to be going to a public safety core, which will have additional elements of cybersecurity, network security, architecture benefits that they would not be seeing on the commercial grade network that AT&T offers to the public. Includes AT&T is actually, or FirstNet is mandated by the legislation to have their partner work with roaming carriers, and in our state, the main roaming carriers are Viero, Union Wireless, and ComNet. And so AT&T is working on creating relationships with those folks, and the benefit there is not only will the network be expanded, perhaps beyond AT&T's initial footprint, but they will also be able to offer secure transactions as public safety users roam onto that network. So there will be benefits from a roaming perspective as well, especially for those of you who travel to or live in rural Colorado. That's kind of the next bullet I hit on. And then they also are going to have a comprehensive device and application ecosystem. That device ecosystem, if you actually go out onto the public website, you can see some of the devices available. They're going to be working with their equipment manufacturers to get the Band 14 chip into devices eventually. FirstNet is going to develop its own app store where they will vet apps and promote them to public safety as capabilities that an agency may want to consider for various reasons: interoperability, situational awareness, enhanced location capabilities, location-based services. So that's exciting as well, because we're going to see that ecosystem expand beyond the iOS and Android, just kind of go out there and download. Really, it's going to be focused on public safety. Anything else you want to add on the AT&T network right now, Marcos or Jennifer?
I just would add that if there's applications that departments or agencies that you'd like to today, they'll still be able to provide those moving forward.
Okay, and I'll just state that for the sake of the phone. If there are applications that public safety agencies are using today, you will be able to use them going forward. So it's not a situation where if you jump on FirstNet AT&T, they're dictating your use. In fact, I think they're open to having as broad and safe an ecosystem as possible. So we're going to talk about various topics. I think in Colorado, the most important topic that we're going to want to hit on with all of you is coverage, because coverage is really a challenge in Colorado. Not so much here along the Front Range area, capacity might be more of an issue, but certainly on the western slope and even on the eastern plains a bit, we want to be able to understand the coverage provided currently. We want to understand the coverage proposed in the next 5 years, and then also understand that the network is going to be evolving. As I mentioned, AT&T is under contract for 25 years, and even in an opt-out situation, a state has to be prepared to have a network for 25 years as well. We are going to talk about what is publicly available now in terms of coverage maps, and then we are going to talk about what will be available in 5 years, or what's called the final operating capability. That's really mostly available in the state plan portal, but I'll let AT&T speak to how they see that expanding over time as well. We're going to talk about LTE versus non-LTE coverage. Why is that important? Well, LTE is the technology that FirstNet and AT&T have been mandated to provide on the network. Today, a large portion of the state has non-LTE coverage. And what I mean by that is there might still be some 2G capabilities out there, especially in rural Colorado. And there also is 3G capabilities, which is not the same as LTE. So keep that in mind, where you might be getting some broadband or some data transactions on 3G. The intent is really to provide a robust 4G network across the state eventually, in an opt-in or opt-out situation. Our team did quite a bit of data collection in terms of the performance of the AT&T network, and this was I'll call it mostly not scientific. It was used using some apps to capture data that was then mapped, so we can get an idea of where coverage does well as on their 4G network across the state, and then where coverage still is lacking and there are gaps so we can ensure if they don't know where those gaps are, we've assessed where those gaps are and can provide that feedback to them. So we'll go over some of that analysis results, and that analysis was done not only with handhelds in cars, but it was also analyzing data from the Colorado State Patrol vehicle modems as they drove out around the state. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to look at some gaps. The gaps really, we focused on highways that are critical arteries in the state that public safety drives a lot along in various rural areas, and understanding that that's really going to be an elephant we're going to eat one bite at a time. We obviously, from AT&T or an opt-out perspective, would not be able to solve those problems immediately or necessarily even in the first 5 years, but we'll be able to triage those gaps and then work on them slowly. So this is a map of AT&T and their partners, and what I mean by that is roaming or potential roaming partners. And this is a map of 2016 FCC coverage. So each year, wireless carriers are required to provide the coverage to the FCC, and we took that information and mapped it. It was made available in June or July this summer, and so we mapped it to give us an idea of where things were about 10 months ago. We'll also be showing you a map of where, in a moment, of where AT&T estimates they will be at the end of this year. You'll see the key on the bottom, the AT&T LTE coverage is in that darker blue. Roaming partner LTE coverage is in the lighter blue. So that, for example, is, right here, that, for example, is Viero that provides that coverage. And then the green is where there is 3G, which is HSPA or HSPA plus coverage. So in these, there's a number of large pockets. But the intent from AT&T's perspective is that they will be slowly, over time, upgrading their infrastructure from 3G to 4G. So as I mentioned, the intent is to have a 4G network. And then some of the gray is 2G and 3G capabilities of other roaming partners. Up in the northwest part of the state is Union Wireless. And then the white areas are those areas not covered, and you'll see a lot of that is along the Continental Divide, which is challenging any way you look at it, and probably never going to have a terrestrial network. We would look at solving coverage in those areas largely with deployable solutions that would be brought in by AT&T or an agency, because either a deployable, if FirstNet and AT&T are brought into the state, and we'll kind of hit on that as well. The purpose of showing this map is to give you an idea of what we believe coverage is when you are driving with a phone in your car, not with an antenna, not with a modem and antenna on a police or fire vehicle, because for a lot of responders, a phone in their car might be the only capability they have on the 4G network. This is a map of AT&T and FirstNet, what we're calling outdoor coverage. For AT&T's mapping purposes, they call indoor coverage when you have like a phone in a vehicle. So that, again, was the previous model. But the outdoor coverage is the expectation of coverage, again, if you have the antenna and the modem in the vehicle. And you'll see the key is the same. And this is what AT&T proposed the network will look like by the end of this year. Correct? I just want to make sure that roughly, because that's what, yeah, Garrett's nodding his head yes. Thank you, Garrett. I just want to be sure that we represent it accurately. Whoops. So you'll see you have the same areas, but you also see based on the reporting to the FCC from the year before, it looks like capabilities are going to be filled in terms of upgrading from 3G to LTE coverage, whether it's with their roaming partner or on the AT&T network itself. Any questions on those two maps? So here we've zoomed in on the North Central region and the South Central region. The North Central region is Denver and surrounding counties, and then the South Central region, I think it's 6 or 8 counties, including El Paso County, and then into the mountains all the way up into Lake County. The South Central region has significantly more mountain coverage requirements than the North Central region. But the North Central region does include Clear Creek and Gilpin counties as well, so they do have some challenges associated with mountain coverage. And this is the SCC's view, just zoomed in of that data. So I won't go over it in great detail. I kind of explained to you the reasoning why we did the approach of analyzing both sets of data. And then here is AT&T and FirstNet's 2017. So by the end of this year, what they expect their network to look like, and that would be available obviously in an opt-in situation. This is again pulled from their FirstNet.com public website. So here I'm going to talk a little bit about the data that we pulled from the Colorado State Patrol. We took about 1.7 million data points, or 1.9 million data points, and we mapped this across the state to give us an idea of where coverage exists and where there are gaps in coverage. And so you'll see on the right side there is the key to understand the RSRQ, which is the reference signal receive quality, essentially, which is giving us an idea of how the network performs for those State Patrol vehicles on the AT&T network. And you'll see that across the state, especially on the east and in the metro areas, there's a pretty good coverage. In the southeast, there's some gaps, and then along the western slope, there's more gaps, certainly understandable, but we also know that this is 4G data that was being tested, and remember, AT&T is in the process of upgrading its network from 3G to LTE. When I say 4G, I mean LTE as well. And then here is the CSP data put on top of the map that AT&T proposes would be the coverage in the state towards the end of this year, just to give you an idea. We also did the in-vehicle coverage testing. So as I mentioned, we actually took AT&T, or we took Sonim devices, which were a hardened LTE device. We used AT&T as the carrier. They provided the SIM cards, thankfully, for us. And then as we were out and about in the state doing outreach, we had the phones on. We had an application called NetMotion and another one called NetMonitor, and we were trying to capture the SINAR, which is the signal interference to noise ratio, the different measurements, but it kind of gives you a sense of the coverage within the state using that device. Understand again that these devices, these handheld devices, are always going to perform less or not as well than they would perform than the modem connected to the computer in the car would perform, because that device has more output power. So just keep that in mind. And so as a result, that's why you see more areas kind of where the coverage is more challenging because the device doesn't perform as well. You see in the metro area, pretty good. And then the key is up here for you as well. Is purple is the no LTE at all. And then this is the same data, and it's put on the same FirstNet and AT&T map for the state, to give you an idea of where there might not be coverage in certain areas that AT&T perhaps expects that coverage will improve over time. Yes?
The no LTE, does that mean that it potentially has 3G coverage, or does that no?
Correct. It could be that there was 3G coverage. Yes. Thanks for clarifying that. I will qualify. Remember, the AT&T network, the idea is LTE is where you want to be, because it's only on LTE that you can have priority and preemption access as a first responder. So we're not saying that 3G capabilities don't provide data transactions, but remember, FirstNet is about priority and preemption on the network. So we did the same exercise with the North Central region and the South Central region data zoomed in for you. And that information is the next few on these slides. I will belabor the points as well. So you'll see there that the coverage is pretty good in the metro areas, we would expect. out on some of the county roads, it becomes a little more challenging. And then maps on their maps. And then the same for the in-vehicle coverage testing. And so we did a comparison, a statistical comparison, and these are how it came out. In the North Central region, there's actually AT&T supposes by the end of 2017 that there would be 100% population coverage with 97.5% area coverage. And those numbers are lower from the FCC reporting perspective. But remember, that was data from about a year ago, if not a little bit longer. And then we did an aggregate of AT&T and their roaming partners below, so it shows you that those statistics increase when AT&T is building out the network with their partners. We don't know what the exact details are of AT&T's build-out plan. You can see this from a more phased approach across the next 5 years through that secure state portal. So if you'd like more detail in your area to see how it progresses, especially if you're in rural areas, again, we would encourage you to ask for access to that portal. We also did statistical breakouts by county for the North Central region. So if you have any interest in that, we will provide the deck after. We would encourage you to look at that data. And then this is for the South Central region, the same kind of breakout by county for those areas as well. Are there any questions on those maps as I kind of explain them, or do you guys have anything else to add? Okay. So the other thing we did, and this is against the AT&T map. We also highlighted in red coverage areas that we believe are significant roads that are highways across the state that we would want to see covered. There were gaps when we were looking at other versions of maps within the state portal. There were areas that we were concerned about how well the coverage would be addressed, and so we've just highlighted those in red, and there are various areas throughout the state. And that also helps us create a gap list by which we can triage and determine the priority areas in the state and provide that input to AT&T and FirstNet. They are very much wanting a dialogue with the state with regards to ensuring that we know what our priorities are in coverage, and in an optimum situation, they would assist us in meeting those priorities in terms of how they were going to deploy the network. And that's important because in a commercial situation, I can tell you that AT&T may not be as concerned about, way out on the Eastern Plains filling in this hole versus adding, and I'm speculating, adding capacity perhaps in the metro area. So where it's not a priority for them from a commercial perspective, because it's a priority from a public safety perspective in Colorado, they are open to building infrastructure in those areas sooner than they might have otherwise, or potentially in areas where they never would have built out, but because we say it's important, they're doing it. And then this is a zoom in of the North Central and South Central regions and some of those coverage areas that are considered gaps. If there are coverage areas in your jurisdictions and that you'd like to know where in the list they are falling out, we'd be happy to talk with you and share that information as well. And if we are unaware of the importance of getting that gap filled as we prioritize across the state, we certainly want to hear that information from you, because if we find out that a fire department has dozens of calls a year involving fatal accidents, let's say on a rural road, we want to know that, because that might pop the list higher and more quickly than another area. And that's really just the lack of the ability to get out across the state and understand where everybody has an emergency all the time. We do our best, but we're always open to getting more information to help facilitate those decisions. And this is just a list of some of those coverage gaps to give you an idea of where on state highways they are. Also understand that Walden to Granby, as an example, State Highway 125, that's a huge distance. And we know, obviously, with 1 or 2 LTE sites, that may not be able to be covered. And we are, as I mentioned earlier, trying to eat the elephant one bite at a time, knowing that there might be areas on some of these longer road sections that we simply want to work with AT&T to fill in over time, and knowing that eventually the coverage will be improved. These coverage gaps would also be valid in an opt-out situation, obviously, as well, because we don't know what that network would look like, and it would be important for us to know, in addition to anything that would be provided by an opt-out vendor, that there are areas that we would want them to address. And that's the rest of the coverage gaps list. So before I step into the pricing, I just want to pause and ask if there are any questions on the coverage piece at all. Here.
I would just say that on these coverage gaps, there was roughly around 50 of those that have been identified, and we've already been working with the state to come up with plans to address on the first page. Glenwood Canyon, for example, and there's 285. There was stuff in Evergreen. Those are all places that we already have some active discussion going on looking for ways to address them, and plan to do that.
Thank you. And I also want to qualify that AT&T asked for kind of how we would prioritize, and we said our priorities across the state are obviously state highways, federal highways, major county roads. There are also population centers that are over 1,000 unless it's a county seat. We identified one county seat that was missing coverage, East Colorado, and so we said that's a priority. And then we also said that anywhere where there's critical infrastructure, so as we think about over time where there are significant, could be, I'm thinking of reservoirs, of critical infrastructure, I even would include city and county buildings or public safety buildings. We want coverage for those areas. We want coverage for schools and hospitals as primary areas eventually in the state that we want to see the network covered. We want high traffic venue areas, obviously in the Front Range area, but out in Telluride, where they have the Bluegrass Festival. We want to ensure that there's coverage in places like that eventually too. So those were the high-level priority areas, and then we just, again, as I mentioned, slowly chip away with FirstNet and AT&T's help at where these other areas might be that are critical to us, focusing on the highways first and foremost. So another element after coverage that public safety stakeholders have said is really important to them is obviously the cost and pricing of the network. And we want to just kind of step through some information on that for all of you as well. There are multiple purchasing or contracting vehicles that can be used in the state. By default in our state, we tend to refer to NASPO, the National Association of State Purchasing Officials, which used to be WISCA, or the Western States Contracting Alliance. And that is not the only tool that's out there. GSA, which is the federal procurement, NPP, which I understand is used primarily for fire departments. Those are all purchasing or procurement vehicles to access the AT&T FirstNet network as well. And on this deck, we've provided you links to those. So you have a choice in an opt-in situation of where or how you want to procure access to the network. AT&T can provide cost analysis for agencies. I'm going to briefly go over a tool we've developed internally. But if you have a desire to know pre-opt-in or post-opt-in what the implication and cost for your agency might be, AT&T is happy to help you figure that out. As we step through the pricing piece, there are going to be two plans that we're going to go over, the unlimited plan and the pool plan, and those are designed for agencies to really analyze and make the best determination about how to get the most cost-effective access to the network for their responders. The AT&T Dynamic Traffic Management Tool is the tool that AT&T uses to provide priority and preemption access on the network. Remember, priority access, and I'll go into it a little bit more, is going to be available by default at no additional cost to those 5 flavors of first responders. Preemption will be available to them as well. Preemption is the ability basically to push somebody off the network temporarily. Ideally, that'd be somebody who's using the network commercially, not in a public safety perspective. but they would be preempted temporarily or essentially have their service degraded. Likely they wouldn't even notice it, kind of like when you're at the Pepsi Center and frustrated that you can't get a picture on Facebook, right? You just experience the degradation in the network, and the intent is that public safety would never have that user experience, or if they did, it would be very, very rare. And that's the tool that basically is part of the service that AT&T provides to manage that piece. We've included some links to resources. The AT&T Service Guide for FirstNet provides a lot more detail if you care about the small print and asterisk associated with the plans. And then they've got primary user brochures, which they explain the difference between primary and extended primary, and I'll touch on that in just a moment. They have an extensive equipment list that they make available for you, and then they have links. I mentioned NASCO in Colorado is our primary procurement vehicle for a lot of agencies. And then want to qualify that equipment can be purchased through AT&T, or you could purchase through other network or equipment providers. You know, you could go to Best Buy, and if you had a relationship with them as an agency, and buy equipment through them, wherever an agency can get the best deal for that equipment. But you can coordinate back with AT&T on that piece as well. So primary versus extended primary. As I discussed, primary users are those 5 main public safety folks, and there's actually a FirstNet definition here. And they're really the folks that act as first responders, providing services to the public, law enforcement, fire protection, emergency medical services. That was the initial group. And then this summer, when that was rolled out, the state community said, hey, we really think 911 and emergency management should be part of that group. And so I believe they will be considered primary users on the network as well. Extended primary users are everyone else. So if you think about emergencies anywhere in the country, those extended primary users are those folks that are oftentimes first responders in your community too. You know, if you have a vehicle accident that hit an electric pole, who do you want out there? Who does the fire department want out there before they get out there? They want utilities out there to make that space safe. So utilities should have access to the network, but in theory, you don't want them to have primary access to the network at all times, because we want public safety who's day-to-day out there keeping the community safe to do that. If you think of other folks, there could be hospital folks, there could be school bus drivers or school security folks, there could be security folks, there could be any flavor of it that you can think about, corrections folks, if they aren't providing a primary, you know, if they're not out hunting parolees or probation folks, that sort of thing. So that everyone else category is considered an extended primary user. And the difference between those really is the ability to have default priority and preemption. Primary users will always have, with no additional charge, priority and preemption access on the network. The extended primary users will not ever have preemption access. They will be allowed to have priority access for free if there's a localized incident occurring. So think of that example I gave. Ed's out on a fire call in Evergreen. He's an Evergreen volunteer firefighter. Somebody hits a utility pole. We want utilities to have priority access because it's a large accident and it's a snowstorm at the same time. There's going to be the ability to uplift utilities for the duration of the incident, and if that incident is more than a few hours, is it up to 24 hours that it lasts by default, and then you can go in and keep them uplifted if it's longer than 24 hours. And that's at no cost to the utilities agency if they're subscribing to the FirstNet network. If the utilities agency decides that they want access 100% of the time as a priority user, they can pay for that. And that's by purchasing that ADTM tool I talked about. And that would be a cost of $7.50 per month per device. So that's really the primary difference. So understand that extended primary users can have priority access to the network as needed on a temporary basis to support an incident. If they desire it 100% of the time, then they would have to pay for it. Did I explain that correctly? And that pretty much is what is covered in the last 2 bullets. And this is, so I talked about 2 plans, an unlimited plan and a pooled plan. Here are the unlimited plans, costs. The unlimited plan for smartphones, and that gives you unlimited talk, text, data, mobile hotspot, and tethering. So the difference between the first one and the second one is really that tethering piece. And that can be of value because you can make your device a hotspot and then have other devices hop onto that hotspot as needed. You're paying a difference of $60 a month versus $50 a month. And then data for data, or unlimited for data-only devices is, which includes mobile hotspot and tethering, is at $40 a month. AT&T does caveat that if you have an agency that's going to be doing bulk purchasing and you're interested in discussing with them if there's better pricing available, we would encourage you to do that. They are willing to do that.
Question?
Yes.
Taxes and stuff on top of that?
Yes, right.
Whatever's applicable that you, if you're nonprofit, there's page 9.
And for people on the phone, the question was, does this price include taxes? And Garrett answered that they collect whatever taxes are required to be collected from the jurisdiction at the time. Could be different in different locations. Some other details on the pricing plan. We don't go into a ton of information. You can access this on the service guide. If you are not being prioritized on the network, it really is an unlimited plan and not subject to throttling. Prioritized usage, though, they do cap eventually at 22 gigs per month per device, and that's if the user, and that's for a single user. If the user exceeds that for 3 months continuously, AT&T will visit how they can manage the plan better, potentially by putting that user in a pooled plan. They will not do that out of thin air. They will have discussions with you ahead of time about managing that user or users if that's applicable to that situation. The benefit of unlimited plans is it ensures predictability in price. You know how much you're paying in a month for a given device. One thing to understand is that in your agency, you can have some users on an unlimited plan and some users on a pooled plan within the same account. So that's a good benefit. You don't have to manage everybody the same way. And there might be some non-standard utilization practices based on devices, and we would encourage you to go out and look at the AT&T service guide for more details on that. Again, I called out before that the smartphones that are tethered or have the hotspot capability do have a higher monthly fee because they can be used to provide Wi-Fi or data, Wi-Fi data services to other devices, a laptop or a tablet, that sort of thing. And so they tend to have artificially increased usage. The other plan is a pooled plan. And so basically how you read this chart is you've got the different types of devices pooled for smartphones, for feature phones, which are more like your flip phone type phones. Does anybody still have one of those? All right, so we could skip that, right? And then the pooled data for data-only devices. And data-only devices, again, we're thinking of those laptops, tablets, other devices where you can't affect a telephone call. And so essentially how this works then is the first device is going to pay, depending on the amount of capacity or the amount of gigabytes you want in your plan over the month, the first device is going to pay, like, let's say there's a device that wanted 2 gigabytes, or you wanted 2 gigabytes, you'd pay that $28.50 fee. And then if there was an additional device that you wanted to add to that, you'd be adding $19 per line. And then if you purchased it with a 2-year service commitment, that essentially is a kind of amortized or subsidized way. Is that 2-year service commitment the amortized way to get a device?
Yeah, to get subsidized prices.
Right.
iPhone for $200 versus $800.
Yeah.
Like that. And the reason, frankly, that we have the no commitment on those types of devices is think of those specialized devices you might buy, like a Sodom or ultra bright device that is a stock device. What we want to do is give you an opportunity to buy at a lower price without having to pay for something.
Okay. And so for folks on the phone, basically, Garrett said that that's the ability to amortize or subsidize the device. So that's the difference in the line. And you'll see the cost per gigabyte is increased slightly as well, or the per pooled gigabyte. And then some other details on the pool pricing is that, again, it's a monthly access fee per device, and you have a data usage fee applied against that purchase bundle. And then you can, from an agency perspective, you can really figure out where you fall in terms of benefiting from a pooled plan. Obviously, you don't want to purchase a pooled plan and use the data to the point of having overages, because the overages are significant. The cost to pay for an overage is significantly more expensive than if you figure out what you need ahead of time. And that's the case in commercial usage as well today. And those these numbers here, when you divide them out, they average between about $366 to $475 per gigabyte. As I mentioned, an overage charge of about $10 per gig is measured for usage if you are in excess. Pool plans, so the plans bill for usage and almost any devices allowed. There is no rollover, where today in our commercial accounts, we experience the benefit of rollovers. That doesn't apply in this instance. You can purchase it in those various bundles, and prioritized usage is not capped the way it is for that 22 gigs when you look at an unlimited plan. A couple of other things. So if you think of the whole volunteer firefighter scenario for folks like Ed, where they may want to bring their own device, they use their own personal device as they deploy for their volunteer agency, and they want to be able to access FirstNet because he is a primary responder. That is also called, in the FirstNet and AT&T situation, an individual responsible user, or IRU. And those users will be allowed on the network. They have to be sponsored by an agency. They can't just say, hey, I'm a firefighter, give me access, and FirstNet and AT&T don't check that out. And that intends to be rolled out in the first quarter of 2018. And they will basically bill the individual. The pricing will be the same, or let me qualify that. They will be billed, it can be billed either to the agency or the volunteer, and we'll be hearing more details on that from AT&T and FirstNet in the first quarter. We don't have a lot on it. But the pricing is the same for the responder, whether they're in the agency being billed or whether they're an individual. And then the last piece, I touched briefly on equipment. AT&T is going to offer that 2-year plan to subsidize equipment, and the cost of that option will be additional charges based on the type of device, the feature phone, the smartphone, and then the data-only devices. And you would need to contact AT&T for more details on which devices, what you're interested in, and if there's any benefit in buying in bulk. So as I mentioned before, AT&T is very willing to work with your agency to understand the costs associated with adopting and migrating to AT&T. But our team, actually prior to FirstNet selection of AT&T, we contracted with our contractor Signals Analytics to provide a calculator deliverable, which will help you estimate costs as well. And so we've got this tool. We're ready to publish it hopefully in the next less than a week, and we'll make that available if people desire to just do some math on their own without talking to AT&T or FirstNet initially, but you have either choice. Any questions on pricing? I know these are such interesting topics that you have a whole list. So there are some other considerations as we look at the opt-in situation, opt-out as well. And one of those other considerations, or a few of them that I just want to touch on quickly are here. LMR interface. So for the past, how many dozens of years, LMR has been the only mission-critical capability that public safety has had out there. To date, even as they adopted data, they were not getting mission-critical data access. And so an LMR interface is going to be really important from an adoption perspective, because I think public safety, they don't go out, as you know, from a technology view, they don't go out and buy the newest, coolest whiz-bang stuff and deploy it. They are cautious. They do a lot of research. They make sure they understand the implications of adopting technology and how it will impact their response paradigm in their communities, because they are accountable to the public in terms of how they respond, and they don't want to do anything that would risk their response time requirements, how they interact with the public, any of that. So LMR and how that integrates with LTE eventually is going to be really important to them. I think, you know, we hear out in the space, and AT&T and FirstNet also qualify, they don't believe this is going to happen quickly, but some people say, oh, you're going to see agencies jump from LMR to LTE in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And just understand that's really going to be the decision of the agency. The agencies are going to need to see an interface between LMR and LTE in a way that they are comfortable with, that they can trust, and that they know they can safely migrate or transition, or perhaps live somewhere in between the two spaces. And so AT&T is open to figuring out whether it's an over-the-top application where you're bridging your LMR network via IP to the LTE network and having an app where you can talk, and that capability exists today, or eventually perhaps having an LMR interface more at a native network level, like using ISSI as a technology. I don't know if many of you know, but here in the metro area, we have 5 or 6 different distinct radio networks that are connected via ISSI, which is a P25 bridging architecture. There are other bridges as well that can connect non-P25, like older legacy VHF systems as well. So how we integrate LMR into LTE, increasing that capability, you know, you may have in a law enforcement agency, you may have an officer who doesn't need an LMR, an expensive radio that costs $3,000 to $5,000. Perhaps we can put them on a smartphone and they can transact between LMR and LTE, manage what they need to do, and it's not costing the agency as much. So we have to begin to figure all of that out and assist agencies in understanding not only the integration of those technologies, the transition across that over time in a way that they're comfortable with. Application integration, that really is, as Marcus mentioned earlier, the importance of understanding that you guys already do business on applications, and how are those going to be integrated into the network, into situations where we want to encourage interoperability and data exchange, and do that in a way that keeps your data secure, that keeps the rules of engagement between agencies known, so you guys can share information, you know who's getting what, and you know that there aren't any implications to the security of that information, which could cause you problems from a legal perspective later on. The other thing that we want to be sure, as time passes and these networks are built out and people adopt them, is that we are really creating an ecosystem of interoperability. You know, that if I select a push-to-talk application on the FirstNet AT&T network, that somehow I understand the implications of whether I can talk to my agency next door who might be considering the same thing. Right now, a lot of those over-the-top applications don't talk to each other. So if somebody's using brand X and somebody's using brand Y in their neighboring jurisdictions, we want you guys to understand that could be an interoperability problem, and we want to know in the long term how we avoid that as much as possible, and if we're stepping into it, we step into it knowingly, cautiously, and we understand how we might solve that problem. And then another consideration for all of us to think about is Colorado, as I mentioned. You know, we have lots of high peaks, but our responders go everywhere in Colorado. We have over 70 million tourists visit here a year. People love to come here, but a terrestrial LTE network is not going to be deployed across the entire state, probably even in the 25 years that the network is proposed or under contract with AT&T and FirstNet. So how do we use deployable assets in a really intelligent manner to bring the network to where the first responders go? Those deployables in the early version of the network are going to look like Colt or cell-on-light trucks, which are basically FirstNet and AT&T's deployment of the radio access sites, oftentimes with satellite capabilities, so they're also called SatColt, and they will be deployed within AT&T says in their information within a 14-hour time period, but that would be the worst case scenario. The intent is to actually deploy them more quickly whenever possible. They'll have 72 band 14 Colts, band 14 being the FirstNet spectrum, available in the next year or two that will be deployed or available across the country. We don't know yet how or where in Colorado those would be proposed to be placed. And then you have over 500 deployables on their existing network. So understand that through the ability to contact AT&T and FirstNet in an opt-in situation, you could request a deployable asset based on the incident you have, and that's how you'd be bringing the network to you. In the long term, though, hopefully in partnership with AT&T and FirstNet, or in an opt-out situation, we really have to think creatively about how we bring the network in other places. You know, there's technology today where the network can be pretty small in terms of a form factor. You can put it on the back of a first responder like Ed and take it into the field. And even if he has localized incident capabilities versus connecting back to the network, when he gets back to where the network is, he can connect to it. And so I think AT&T and FirstNet understand the importance of trying to be able to create that capability. We just have to see how it matures over time, and it's really important for places like Colorado to be at the front of that conversation, because that is key to getting the network out across the state for us. So any questions on kind of the state plan coverage, cost, other capabilities piece that I talked about before I step into some of our input process and a bit of the opt-in, opt-out scenario? What I've just spent the last hour-ish covering is all of that information that's publicly available that we want you all to understand could impact your decision, could impact your agency recommendation to our governance group, which will make a recommendation to the governor in the next month, month and a half. Hey, you guys are a quiet crowd.
I know,
So
right?
some of the other groups
Scary.
were very chatty.
Good job.
Thank you. Okay. So we've said your feedback is really important to us. Ed and I have traveled, I don't know how many thousands of miles in the past 3.5 years, because Ed is a first responder. My background is in 911. Our passion is public safety, and we want to be sure that public safety has the best tools available to do their job from a technology perspective. And so as the state plan decision process was coming to fruition this year, we said, you know what, we've been out doing outreach, and it would be really unfair to have been out for 3.5 years and then disappear in the last 6 months and say, we don't want to give you a way to provide us input about what you think of the proposed plan and what you think of the proposed opt-out plan as well, if Colorado ends up determining there's one that's viable. So our team, working in partnership with Signals Analytics, has developed what we're calling a requirements checklist or adoption tool. We literally just published that yesterday. If you go out to firstnetcolorado.org, you can actually access that information. We sent it via our newsletter if you're on that list. Hopefully you saw it. If you didn't, please don't delete the email. Go back and remove it from your delete file and go in and look at it. We've essentially broken out a lot of that public information on cost and coverage into PowerPoints that are available by all hazards regions. So there are 9 decks, and then the Southwest deck includes the availability for the tribes to look at their data. And for agencies to go and review that deck, ask us any questions you might have, and then to answer a quick 1-page questionnaire that asks you, in knowing what you know based on the publicly available information, would you make a recommendation, you or your agency, to our governance group, who again will synthesize the data and consider a recommendation to the governor, based on cost and coverage and other requirements? Would you make a recommendation to the governor to opt in or opt out? And then also, the second question, there's 2 questions, is if your agency would consider adoption sometime in the next 5 years based on the information that we've been able to share with you so far. We do want to caveat that we are still in the process of assessing the opt-out plan. And so you might also say to us, I don't have enough information right now to make a recommendation. Perhaps I'm not authorized to, but here's some input I want to give to you. So really it's a means for you to tell us what you think based on what we're able to share with you publicly. If you're an authorized state plan portal user, then you may have more information, and we would encourage you to include your thoughts on that information as well. We've asked generally that those thoughts, that input be provided to us by November 10th. November 10th is a date just to get you all kind of going on that. The governor will not have made a decision by November 10th. There will still be time after, but we would ask that you try to help us quickly review that and give us input. So quickly, oh yes, go ahead.
So you're talking about the opt-out bids that are still in the process. Is there like an analysis of this, if we opt out on the cost that will be there?
So through the RFP process, we have analyses done by the bidders, but we aren't able to share them because we're still actively in procurement. Our timelines are perhaps not aligning as well as we had hoped. We'd hoped to be able to determine if there was a viable opt-out plan right now, and we don't know the answer to that. So I would encourage someone to say, if you really, if you think AT&T is the best way to go, please tell us that. If you still feel like you want to know what the opt-out options are for the state, then you need to tell us I don't have enough information, and know that we are stepping through that procurement process as quickly as possible.
Follow-up. There is no cost to the state if we do the opposite, correct?
So in an opt-in situation, there is no capital infrastructure cost to the state. There will still be costs to the agencies to adopt the network. Especially if you're already an AT&T user, perhaps not, but certainly if you're going to migrate, there might be device costs, there would be service costs, obviously, regardless of who you subscribe with. There might be infrastructure migration costs, like if you have to deal with firewall issues. Eventually, someday when NG911 and PSAPs might have some connectivity into the network to pass information from the public to responders, there might be costs there. So I think the answer is yes, with an asterisk, that you have to understand the totality of the picture. But AT&T's, in an opt-in situation, AT&T is the one making the investment in the network to expand it.
But those costs would probably be there in opt-out situation.
Yes, exactly.
Build, operate, maintain the network. There's no cost to the state to build, operate, maintain the network. In an opt-in situation. Opt-out, the state takes on that. Either way, it's a company choice. They want to try to present say we are or network, and then there will be costs that are now.
Thanks, Teresa. Any other questions before I kind of touch on the alternative plan? Okay. So we did a two-phase RFP approach in the spring to summer. We qualified bidders. We had two bidders that were qualified, Rivada, who actually lost the national bid to AT&T. They were one of three at the time. And then a company called Macquarie. Their final bids in phase two, once they were qualified, were due September 14th. And then our review committee just met, and they reviewed the responses, scored them, and are still in the process of determining whether either of those bids are viable. As I mentioned earlier, Colorado, through the state plan process, determines that its grant funding request could be between $70.8 and $88.5 million. The higher number is possible based on the number of states that were to opt out. So in theory, what the NTIA has said is that if no states opt out, or perhaps a few states opt out, then chances are our state would be able to apply for that higher number versus that lower number. To date, there have been 26 states and territories that have opted in. So about halfway. There's a halfway point. And a lot of the states surrounding Colorado have opted in, including New Mexico, Wyoming, Nebraska, Kansas, Montana, that sort of thing.
Texas and Alabama were the last two states.
Indiana, just recently too.
Okay.
Yep, yep. Yeah, Texas is the largest state that's opted in. And so this funding level, you might wonder, how did the NTIA come up with that? They actually based it on a study of coverage. They used some tools within the Department of Commerce and NIST, and they estimated the number of sites that would be needed to cover Colorado. They estimated the number of sites roughly in the, I think, 670 sites for Colorado. The challenge with that is that site count approach did not account for providing sites anywhere in the state where there's a population of less than 5 people per square mile. Becomes a challenge from Colorado's perspective because, as I mentioned, we go everywhere. So essentially that doesn't cover most of the federal land in the state, which could be a response challenge for responders to go out where people recreate here. And so as we look at the opt-out process, we would want to talk about key issues from a local perspective. Obviously, and I'll touch on it in just a moment on the slide, in an opt-out situation, we can't, even at a state level, certainly at a local level, come to your agencies, to your elected officials, to the folks that write your checks and say, hey, by the way, can you write a check for X million of dollars to help the state opt out? So the important thing to know is that in this process, in our RFP, we told all of the bidders, anybody who responded, that you have to propose a network that is self-sustaining, that does not require a capital investment from the state or local government, because that is simply not going to happen. And that's actually been a theme in multiple states. I think there are 14 or 15 states that have issued opt-out RFPs, and states simply can't take on that burden. It would be irresponsible. You know, there might be some federal funding available that would be coming from the state in theory, but we cannot as a state say we're going to be writing a check for this. So the mechanics of the opt-out quickly. If the state opts out, as I mentioned, by December 28th, the governor has to make formal notice to FirstNet, to the NTIA, and to the FCC. The state post-opt-out notification would have 180 days to complete an RFP process. We actually, as I mentioned, started that RFP process earlier this year because we thought you can't opt out if you don't have information to base that decision on. We couldn't go to the governor and say, Governor, this is the opt-in plan, and you could opt out, but we don't know anything about what that looks like. We don't know, to your point, about the cost associated with that. So we've begun that process before the statutory requirement to do that. The FCC is the first step in the regulatory process, and they have said that they are required to assess interoperability of an opt-out state plan. There was a report written in 2012 that set the interoperability requirements between an opt-out plan and the FirstNet plan. And so the FCC assesses that interoperability requirement and then gives the state a pass or a fail. And they've said, based on a public notice process, that they will give up to 240 days from the opt-out notification by the governor in December for the state to come forward with that plan. So essentially, we're getting 60 more days beyond what the statute says. We have to complete the RFP in 6 months, and then we have up to 2 more months to effect a contract if we haven't already done it, and to develop that plan and provide it to the FCC. The FCC has said that they aspirationally, I'm sure in the government that makes you feel really good, no offense to our federal partners, that they will try to do that at that review in a 90-day period. And again, that network is a radio access network that has to connect to the FirstNet core, the public safety core. If we are passed through successfully by the FCC, then we have to do a review at the NTIA level. And the NTIA basically is looking at 5 criteria. I won't go through them all, but it's about sustainability of the network. It's about ensuring that we can provide some of the same capabilities, that sort of thing. And the NTIA, we have no idea what the time period associated with that review process would be. They've obviously said they would try to make it as quick as possible. And then after approval by the NTIA, we would still have to negotiate a lease agreement to access the Band 14 spectrum with FirstNet. We have been given a view to some of the details around that lease in an opt-out situation, and our team is assessing them and talking with FirstNet about it because it will impact a recommendation to the governor. So what does opting in mean? As I've kind of painted a picture for you about AT&T and FirstNet's proposed plan, it really means that the state is saying, okay, AT&T and FirstNet come, AT&T with their existing network, in addition to the Band Class 14 spectrum that FirstNet is leasing them, and bring your network to our state and make this an all-band solution. And so AT&T will use Band 14 to augment the network in some locations where capacity is an issue, and then they will also use the Band 14 spectrum to roll it out in some areas, in rural areas of the state as well. This could potentially result, obviously it will over time because they'll augment the network, it'll result in better coverage and performance. We'll have connectivity to that public safety core, you'll have security requirements that FirstNet bakes into their RFP, and that all public safety will benefit from, because understand this is going to be critical infrastructure in the country, and this is going to be a target for rogue players who perhaps want to impact public safety day to day across the country. Every emergency is local originally, so it's important that public safety know they're working on a secured, hardened, resilient network. And then the benefit of partner roaming. You know, AT&T has those relationships, as you saw on the map before, and it's really important that they keep those relationships intact and ensure that the network is available regardless of where you live in the state. There will be individual agency agreements. So understand that the relationship between AT&T is and your agency is exactly that. It's between AT&T and your agency. The only contract that exists is between AT&T and FirstNet. The state has really and acted as a planning participant on behalf of local, tribal, and state agencies, but there will be no contract between the state and FirstNet or AT&T in an opt-in situation. FirstNet has said they will advocate on behalf of the states and public safety and hold AT&T accountable to the contract that exists between them. But right now, states and locals and tribes have no and will not have any view to that contract. So from a service level agreement perspective, if you contract with AT&T to use their services, it's also going to be incumbent upon the agency to have that relationship and hold them accountable too. From a statewide perspective, it's our intent to maintain our governance group and really try and continue to engage with FirstNet and AT&T to ensure the network is built out as promised, to ensure that from a holistic perspective, some part of Colorado is not being left out. You know, oftentimes rural Colorado says, oh, people only care about the metro area in the state. And we want to ensure from a public safety network access build out performance perspective that doesn't occur. So although we don't have a contractual relationship, the only contractual relationship is between those two entities, we want to ensure that relationship is still there from the state to FirstNet and AT&T, even if it's not in writing. And then the last thing is essentially your communications are still based on a commercial platform. It's no different than the technology you're using today commercially as a citizen or as a responder, but understand you're getting that quality of service priority and preemption that hasn't been available on commercial networks. So what does opt-out mean? It means that we're going to try from an opt-out perspective to do most of the things I just described in an opt-in perspective. I won't argue that it won't be challenging depending on who a network partner would be for that situation, but we obviously can't do it on our own. But the days of the state going out and building a network on its own, like they did with Land Mobile Radio and the DTR system, or even the regional networks that exist in the metro area, that is gone. This technology is too expensive and too complicated for local, state, tribal agencies to think they can do it on their own. The only way it can be done responsibly is through a public-private partnership. As I mentioned in the details of the RFP, we have indicated to potential partners that there cannot be any state, tribal, or local capital costs, that really there has to be the reliance on the partner to be creative in a public-private partnership, much the way AT&T was creative with FirstNet. And then potentially the infusion of those grants, so one-time grant dollars to augment the network. That would be the only way that the state could responsibly consider doing something like this. The state would also have to look to build it on an existing assets, and those assets could be state assets, infrastructure, towers, buildings, et cetera, that we already have. It could be local government and tribal assets. But we know that this cannot be a greenfield network. The state cannot go out and say, okay, let's start digging in the ground and build this network from scratch. That is irresponsible as well, from a fiscal and from a timeline or deployment perspective. Understand that in an opt-out situation and in an opt-in situation, either way, whoever builds and offers this service to the state has to be commercially competitive, and that public safety agencies will always have the choice of who they want to buy their service from. In the end, a public safety agency is essentially a consumer making the best choice for themselves, and that the value proposition of the service provider, whether it's AT&T and FirstNet in an opt-in situation, whether it's an unknown provider in an opt-out situation, or whether it's one of the main 3 other providers in the country, or a tier 2 provider, one of the smaller folks, they have to earn your business. And they need to be able to demonstrate to you that they're providing a service in a network that you can rely on as a public safety agency. So don't forget that. In the end, after all of the mechanics and politics of this situation, the decision still lives in your agency's hands in terms of what service you'll use.
I want to add on to that. That's
Sure.
a real critical point. And that part of the RFP that the contract that FirstNet has with AT&T, if AT&T does not do a good enough job to earn public safety business, there's incentive. So if they have a certain percentage of the public safety in the state, if they don't, they basically get fined. They need to really work and listen to provide that service. In opt-out situation, the very same accountability. That's where you guys have the open power.
And for the people on the phone, Tracy with FirstNet just reiterated that the power really resides in the hands of the agencies, and that you get to make the choice if AT&T is in an opt-in situation selected and they don't meet the adoption and other requirements that are contractually there between FirstNet and AT&T, then they have penalties as a result of not meeting the contractual requirements. So really, the power is in your hands. And then the other thing, the last 2 things, so I touched on governance in our governance group across the state. We would obviously, in an opt-out situation, have to look at some sort of statewide, not just ad hoc governance that's been in place for the past 4 years, but really statutorily created and with the power to manage that network from all perspectives: procurement, operations, maintenance, deployment, everything. That's not an easy lift, would certainly be a significant consideration for the governor as well. Opting out for us, though, also, our team is actually part of the Colorado Broadband Office, which was just established officially by the governor earlier this year. And this office, while we've been focused, our team primarily on public safety, broadband, and FirstNet, Brian, who's not here, and then Tony Neal Graves, our director of the office, they've been focused on rural broadband issues. As many of you know, especially in rural areas of Colorado, it's been very hard to get broadband capabilities out to a lot of small communities. And so in an opt-out situation, we won't lie to you, public safety cannot sustain its own network. It would be irresponsible of Colorado in an opt-out situation to think that we're just going to come in and duplicate, and public safety is the only user on the network in a public-private partnership. We would have to be creative, as FirstNet has been with AT&T, using a commercial network to support and sustain public safety dedicated services. Colorado would have to look at how we can create synergies to deploy rural broadband capabilities in a public-private partnership opt-out situation. So what I mean by that is, in our RFP, we've actually said to these folks, hey, in addition to offering a wireless network, there's going to be backhaul infrastructure and other capabilities that we need you to understand we are trying to solve. NG 911, education, healthcare, intelligent transportation, economic development. You know, CDOT, the only way they're going to be able to deal with traffic problems in the state is not by widening the highway. They are going to have to deal with sensors and alarms and really be intelligent about how they move traffic in the state. How can we, from an opt-out perspective, provide infrastructure that not only supports the public safety capability, but then helps us solve some of these other requirements? You know, people are leaving the rural areas because they can't get basic, you know, 3 gig down, 1 gig up service on their wired connections. So how do we as a state begin to solve some of those other problems? And so in our opt-out situation, we said, okay, public safety is our priority, but you've got to help us solve these other problems to sustain the network through secondary use of infrastructure. Otherwise, it's just not going to work for Colorado. So that is essentially our presentation. And I have to caveat here that grant funds were used and state funds were used for this presentation, and that FirstNet, AT&T, Commerce, NTIA, all of those federal folks don't endorse or agree with what I just spoke to you about. But just wanted to caveat that. So.
And for that very reason, it's very important that we get you to sign in. So if you haven't signed in, I'm going to send this around again. We have about 23 people in the room and only about 12, 13 people on the sheet.
Thanks, Ed.
So
that was a lot of information. I could tell you we're just super excited. But I want to be sure that this is a really important initiative. It's critical to Colorado in the next 1 year, 5 years, 25 years, that we make the best decision for public safety. And so that's why we kind of talk ad nauseum about some of the stuff that's not super interesting, but we think it's really important from our planning perspective to all of you. So thank you for your time, and I would certainly offer, if you have any other questions, that we have plenty of time to discuss those. Yeah.
Question going back to the opting opt-out slide that we were just discussing. You mentioned in an opt-in situation, when we're talking about security and cybersecurity, AT&T and take a lot of that to what they're working on. Opt-out situation, following security, cybersecurity, does that then go to state to fund security?
I think the state would look for their partner to provide a solution that, well, and frankly, from an interoperability perspective, we have to meet or exceed what AT&T is doing. Because the FCC is going to look at that and say, is it comparable? The NTIA is going to look at it and say, is it comparable? And we can't propose introducing any vulnerabilities in there that would be different and not on par with what the national offering. Yeah, exactly. Do you have, yep.
2 more questions for the opt-in model. First, for rural areas, is it assumed then that all votes will be listed for users in those areas that are getting the emergency first responder technology, so that other users on AT&T in rural areas would be also using the network when it's done?
Yeah, so the, and I'll let you guys elaborate, but the, so day to day, public safety traffic will be on the same radio access network, diverted to the public safety core, and the general public will be on the same radio sites, but they'll be diverted to the commercial core. And so in theory, you'll always be provided priority and preemption access as a primary user, and the public, if there were a localized incident at a cell tower that the capacity was eaten up, then they would experience degraded service, so they'd be moved to another chunk of spectrum on the AT&T network. So really the intent is for public safety to have the best quality of service as possible at all times. If you're a primary extended user, they would be uplifted in the case of an incident, but day to day they would be experiencing the same kind of commercial experience. Garrett, I'll stop there.
Excellent job, Kim. So if we, an AT&T had this cell site, if we added for FirstNet, also added for consumer traffic as well. And then just to understand, the foundation of band class 14 that was licensed out and structured by the federal government is to be a private-public partnership. So that is how it's sustainable.
alert as well as first responder. If you go back to some of the early auctions of that spectrum that didn't go through, that was a challenge, was to try to build a public safety only RAN network. It's not cost effective, and so through FirstNet they restructured that so it was a private-public partnership. Does that make sense?
Yep. And part two is what happens to that 70 to 88 million? Does that go to other states to help subsidize if they don't opt in, or is that going to turn taxpayers?
It's kept by FirstNet as part of the AT&T contract. Essentially, AT&T was, so in the Spectrum Act, FirstNet was given $7 billion. About $500 million of that is meant for operations and maintenance of FirstNet, the organization, and then the balance of it is primarily for FirstNet to use as incentive or seed money for their partner to be able to begin deploying the network. But then AT&T has said that they're going to make, in addition to that, $5.5 or $6 billion they're getting from FirstNet. The fewer states that opt out, the more I believe they get. And but then AT&T has said, in addition, they're going to make a $40 billion investment in the network over the life of the contract over 25 years. So that money actually never came from taxpayers. It came from spectrum auctions about 2 years ago. And so that money is free and clear of the whole national debt deficit thing, given to FirstNet specifically for this deployment. And the requirement of a public-private partnership actually mandated that FirstNet can never go back to Congress and say, we need more money. If they fail to sustain it on their own, they have to be accountable. And, back to the legislators who wrote the act, and AT&T is accountable to them from a contractual perspective for not sustaining the network. So, yeah. Right.
Can I add a little bit of color to that?
Sure.
I just want to provide some insight into what I believe Colorado's really unique position when it comes to FirstNet. You've got I'm biased, but I recently just left Aurora, my nice cushy job as a captain in the fire department for the rest of my career, to join AT&T because I really believe in this. But the assets that are here in Colorado are really cool. So you've got myself, which is a subject matter expert just focused on fire, EMS, and emergency management, translating that into AT&T speak so they can actually deploy what you want. But in addition to that, you have people like Garrett and Marcos on the deployment team who are for the entire Region 8 area, but are based here in Colorado. And then you have Tracy, who's up in FirstNet in the labs, which are in Boulder, Colorado. So all the technology that's being developed and deployed is in Colorado. So as we move forward, especially on that LMR discussion, that's really where first responders are going to be making the decisions and building out and doing pilot programs. So Colorado has the opportunity to be on the front lines of those decisions and on those innovations. So I think from that perspective, it's going to be a lot of fun. So I'm definitely invested in Colorado specifically. So from an opt-in position, we're going to have that great opportunity. Opt-out, we're going to be approximately 2 years behind the 8 ball, and those ships will probably have already failed. Just my percent.
Thanks, Ryan. And I think the challenge of the opt-in, opt-out decision is really ensuring, for us in Colorado, it's ensuring that the coverage and the cost and the capabilities of the network are as good, well, frankly, better, right? Colorado's getting a better situation. Perhaps we're meeting some of those rural broadband needs, and we take that decision very seriously, because what we don't want to do is create a situation where we are kind of gambling on an opt-out, and then Colorado loses the opportunity of what AT&T and FirstNet have to offer. But understand that we don't know the answer to that today, and Colorado takes it very, very seriously to answer that question for all of you. 25 years is a long time to be tied into a single vendor, a single approach. In the end, it's your agency's decision as a consumer. But we want to be sure that you guys get the best possible network to do what you need to do. And in the past 3.5 years, in the next 2 months, that's what we're taking the time to do, is to answer that question thoughtfully and responsibly with your help. And I can tell you that the governor takes that very seriously as well. If he kind of wanted the easy way out, I think he would have already made a decision. So we know that it's important to him to have all of the information possible to make the best decision, because that decision is impactful to the state either way. So, thank you, Red. Any other questions? Yep.
Two concerns we have is the, hardening of the system, from 9/11 all the way up to the recent hurricanes. We've seen massive system failures. How does FirstNet or AT&T, how are they gonna resolve that? We also have concerns over the cybersecurity, but also the physical security of sites. We know that they use a lot of contractors that'll have access to these sites, from people doing heating and air conditioning to lawn maintenance to tower climbing crews. How are they going to resolve those problems?
So, I think one of the challenges that we have to think about with a cellular-based network versus an LMR network, just from a site hardening and a reliability perspective, is the concept of overlap. For example, here in this area of town, your cell phone might be seeing 5, 6, 7, 8 different cell sites. So when you build your reliability schematic, it looks a little bit different. LMR, you're typically connecting only to one tower at a time. If that tower goes out, that whole area of the town may be dark and without service. In the cellular world, you see that it changed quite a bit, because if the site's down, odds are you're going to be able to connect to the LMR site, or you're going to be able to connect to the cell site, or one of the other neighboring sites right out of the gate. The other thing is, AT&T has a pretty robust backup plan, offering battery backup at all of our cell sites. We have some key sites that have generators, and then we also have deployable generators. And I think we've made some significant improvements. If you go look and see how Houston survived cellular-wise in the last flood compared to how Katrina was a few years ago, we saw 90-some% uptime on the cellular network down in a catastrophic failure. Where in Katrina, we saw some massive failures. So I think there's been definitely some lessons learned from that. AT&T still can keep and maintain our own deployable fleet that is to repair our network. Those are those hundreds of vehicles that we have. The 72 additional satellite poles will be available for coverage protection. Think the Boy Scout troop that's lost up in the hills that you need to send out a search and rescue team for. So we're making several of those different levels of prevention, because when you look at doing uptime of the network, you have to address it at all the different levels. It's not just enough to do it at the fence, it's not just enough to do it at the tower. It has to be all the way through that network build out. And we have some specific uptime goals that we have to meet when it comes to this network with FirstNet. And as far as agency specific, we'd love to sit down and talk through and understand what some of those requirements might look like for you, whether that's designing dual backhaul into a data center so that we can make sure your devices have more than one path into a CAD system, or whether that's talking about your agency wanting to have their own deployable type solution, or whether that's going to look at satellite. That's also another viable need. So what I would encourage you to look at it is, it's going to take multiple different systems to come up with a solution. And as far as contractors involved, we have a pretty rigorous process on how we credential and manage those. And frankly, I think you're going to have some of the same types of questions you have to ask whether you opt in or opt out, because I'm not here in the state of Colorado saying they're going to go hire their own tower groups. I don't think that's under any assumption that there's going to be another service provider that's going to be involved with that. Does that help, or is there a specific area I could drill into for you?
We can talk more about it later.
I'd be happy to set something up. Let me know.
If I can just add on, I'm here from Sierra Wireless, and our main territory is in northeastern Colorado, but we also cover Kansas, or at least a portion on the northwestern side, and the majority of Nebraska. We have over 800 tower sites and have been in operation for 25 years. We're a local business here in Colorado, and we have yet, I knock on wood, because our towers are backed up not only with batteries, but with generators. They're built to the highest grade. We have not lost a tower in 25 years since the tornado in that region, which is very tornado heavy throughout the year. So, just to add some additional security there.
Any other questions or comments? Go ahead, Albert.
Just an observation
Sure.
for us.
is during the definition of first responder, transportation wasn't mentioned as either as a tier 1 or a tier 2 responder. So from a prioritization standpoint, where would CDOT fall in there?
So they would be considered a primary extended user.
Sure.
I apologize if that didn't come through in the message. I was trying to think of everybody. Transportation, I actually think transportation is one of the most important partner responders in the entire state. You know, obviously from a state maintenance perspective, but in emergencies, fires, snowstorms, et cetera. So what would be there, Albert, is the ability to uplift CDOT users during any localized incident. That would be the easiest, least expensive way to do it. But CDOT would have the option to buy priority access per device at $750 per month if they desired as well. And it could be that you just desire to do that for certain elements of your fleet, like your plows, and, right? Not for every supervisor that's out there. But do you have anything to add to that?
I would just say, you know, from an AT&T perspective, we're trying to fulfill a contractual obligation for FirstNet as well as with our local agencies. So I think there's ongoing discussion of what a first responder is. I think that's heavily involved in that definition. AT&T is here to fulfill the mission of FirstNet, and that definition involves where you're supporting that. We're not here to exclude, and from what I can tell, everybody here is pretty open about trying to understand that.
Do you want to add to?
Now, one way to look at it is that the primary is the first responders, and the extenders are who the first responders call into the help.
Okay, and that's where I'm going. On our infrastructure, we are. Okay, 90% of the cases, we are. And that's on our infrastructure. Okay, and so outside of our infrastructure, we don't respond. Only on our infrastructure, which is federal, state, and highway system, which is interstates, U.S. highways, state system. Okay, all of those systems that was identified there is sufficient in communication. That's where we work. Okay, and that's the only places that we work. So based on that, I'm just looking at one from a financial standpoint for CDOT. Being extended user on infrastructure that we respond to. Seems to be a disconnect there based on primary versus extended. That's something we can talk about. The other question is, will this in any way improve LMR coverage along those corridors that are deficient in cellular?
So I think the quick answer would be no. There's no intent to deploy additional LMR, DTR, other state networks. At the same time, AT&T is augmenting their network. But what I will tell you is, in the case of an opt-in situation or opt-out, the ability to eventually bridge the LMR to LTE, and then perhaps if there's LTE capability somewhere in the state where LMR is lacking, and your folks have either, you know, let's say in an easy case, a smartphone with a push-to-talk app that would enable you to bridge across the network, then I would argue, yes, you are increasing a capability in an area, but that is not day one going to be the situation. Yeah.
Okay. And then the bigger operational picture for us is that currently Federal Motor Carrier prohibits the use of cellular devices in the LTAC vehicle, which we operate.
You just taught me something new today.
Okay. So there
Right.
we go.
Did you guys know that? I didn't know that.
Federal Motor Carrier prohibits the use of cellular devices in city LTAC vehicles. Cellular classified because radios are handheld. Okay, so it's cellular classified, and the reason is distraction.
The federal government?
Federal Motor Carrier.
Department of Transportation?
In city LTAC vehicles. Okay, which are 26,001 pounds or greater, or package.
All right, you just gave us the.
Oops. I need to ask before we get started, especially if we have extended comments, we can actually ask questions, restate, but if you have an extended comment, if you can come to the front, because our folks online can't hear.
Even as I was moving the phone, it seems like that's not adequate.
Sorry about that.
Scott?
I want to go back to Albert's first question, because now I'm thoroughly confused as to what the definition of first responders are, and try to project it into a county government or a city government. And now we have some people that have priority use, some people that don't. And the idea that we can actually determine who the first responders are for any particular incident ahead of time and give them priority use and not others. I don't know, to me, it's we're making a complex situation more complex with the idea that somehow we can predict who needs that access. I mean, the access might be needed by a county commissioner because they got to make a decision. And they're not going to have it because they certainly, none of us want to make our elected officials personal. But I mean, this is, and I thought it was just 3 categories, but now transportation. So who's in and who's out on the priority, is that the right term?
Primary use, which gives you priority preemption. So I'm going to defer pretty quickly here to AT&T and FirstNet, but it's law enforcement, fire, EMS initially, and then 911 and emergency management were added through the summer. In terms of how quickly that access to uplift people, I will defer to you guys on describing that process.
I would like to describe.
Can you come up, sir? You could probably just stay up here.
Yes, you should have just started out.
I was late. So, I think it's important to understand that, a first responder, the 5 categories, you know, guns, hoses, needles, and I don't know what to call it, is, that prioritization is on all the time. There's no magic buttons that need to be dialed, that you don't have to call anybody to get it set up. That is dynamic by the very nature of being a FirstNet subscriber. Opt in, opt out. That's how it's going to work.
And needles are EMS and ambulance drivers.
Yes.
Paramedics. Yeah.
Paramedics. So those groups have that as if they subscribe to FirstNet service, they will have to sign up for a FirstNet-based cellular rate plan and actually be on the network. In their upper left-hand corner or right-hand corner, it won't say Verizon or AT&T or Sprint or T-Mobile. It will say FirstNet, and they will pay a FirstNet bill for that service. Extended primary. Those are users, they still have to enroll into a FirstNet rate plan. There are 2 ways for them to interact. One is they could just buy the kind of a base level of service, and during an incident, a public safety entity could elevate them. There's a blizzard, they need to elevate the snow plows. There's an evacuation, they need to elevate school bus drivers. There's some public utility, power, water, something like that. They also have the ability to buy priority service for an upcharge on a permanent basis. So, but if they want preemption, that only happens when you're a primary responder, and that primary user would be the ability to actually move somebody off the network and make room for the first responder. Does that answer the question?
Well, it answers it, but so during the middle of an emergency, we're asking somebody to elevate my public works status.
Yes, and so.
Does anybody see a problem with that?
Can you describe how you think the process
Yeah,
works?
I don't see, I mean.
So,
We'll make that decision, and who gets the priority out of those 5 groups?
yeah, so the way you would end up doing that is going through a portal-based solution, and you would be able to upload phone numbers into the system and uplift those immediately through the portal. And so if you wanted to have predefined templates, you could have predefined templates, but there are philosophies in emergency management, so that we're not making, we're hoping these decisions are not being completely made on the fly, that your emergency management team would have some ideas of who they would want to uplift during that. And remember, Doesn't mean their phone won't work. We're just wanting to make sure that they have priority access during that actual event or actual emergency.
And I will tell you that one thing from a state perspective, Scott, that we have bandied to FirstNet and are hoping they will provide from a programmatic perspective is helping states figure that exact governance policy perspective out, because AT&T as a technology provider said to us, it's a state issue, local issue for you guys to figure out. I can't argue the mechanics of that in terms of an incident going on and who's going to be responsible for that. I think that's an interesting challenge until eventually maybe someday it's automated. But I think from a statewide, regional, local agency answering that question, that's something that we have to figure out as users who adopt the network, how to support you in understanding that, understanding the limitations and the benefits of that. And if there's something that can be improved by AT&T or FirstNet for that process over time as the network matures. That probably doesn't answer your question either, but Tracy, did you?
Well, I wanted to say that, so that AT&T, think about it as building the network, just like we built the interstate highway. So there's how wide are the lanes, where is it going to go, how is it going to actually look, and then there's how are we going to use it, what color are the signs going to be, how fast can we go on it. And so FirstNet has that as a public safety advisory council, about 40 members from all disciplines of public safety, that's here to help. How do we use this network? So AT&T is like building it, and then now how do we use those apps? What is all the questions that you're asking are all part of that network. What we're talking about today, what Kim is talking about this plan, is the first step is, okay, who's going to build, maintain, who's going to be responsible for that RAN? And then these other things are also very, very important, but they're also things that need to be figured out by public safety. FirstNet was lobbied Congress by public safety, so we like to say by public safety for public safety. And together, we'll figure out some of the details of it. Just like who's a primary user, we added the emergency managers and PSAC. That was important. And part of my job, whether you opt in or opt out, will be to collaborate with you, that liaison, to make this work for public safety. I hope that helps.
I understand. I mean, you have a new product now, and you want to sell it to agency X or citywide, and it's complex when it's most needed. It seems to me. I guess I'm just at one last aspect. So having public works drivers added in as priority users, does that cost? I mean, I guess I'm not understanding why. I think why the folks that the technical audience and response to the myriad of disasters are broader than what we define. Okay? And I guess I don't understand why we can't have a broader definition of first responder so that all potential types, typical responses are covered. But that must cost more money to have them as priority user? Is that why they're not in there, I guess?
I mean, from our perspective, the concept of prioritization, I'll walk by the phone. No, is that, if everybody has priority, nobody has priority. So I think, and FirstNet was developed for first responders, and so as AT&T, we're happy to support whatever we're told to say. I mean, to support when it comes to who's a first responder. But ultimately, there has to be some level of differentiation between somebody that's a first responder and somebody that's not. Otherwise, when you try to elevate and give priority, if everybody on the entire airplane has a first class ticket and can board first, then nobody has a first class ticket because then they all try to get on the plane at the same time.
Aaron, one thing to quickly add, Scott, to kind of picture this out a little bit more, is we're talking about kind of an HOV lane for those primary responders, but those other ones that are extended primary that are signed on to the network, they're also riding on priority. So anytime any large event happens, you're kicking off all those civilian users first. So to get to a point where you're getting even those extended primary users to have difficulty accessing the network is going to be pretty tough. When you're talking 100 to 120 megahertz spectrum that's being used across that, you're kicking all the civilians off. So eventually you're just going to have extended primary and first responders on a tower that can handle 1,000 users. To get to that point is going to be pretty tough. So I think the complexity is there, but to get to that point would be difficult.
I support Scott, though. I would argue that the operational mechanics of dealing with that will be a challenge from an emergency management, COMEL, however a region decides to do that. Like, I have to go remember to uplift that, you know, when they've got a million other things going on, you know. So, I think it'll be really interesting to see how AT&T and FirstNet mature that process over time.
And those are great adoption-related questions that
Yeah.
will be the same questions you would have if the state decided to opt out as well as opt in, because those are how the system will be used, not necessarily how somebody decides to participate as state.
It'll also evolve with needs as we figure it out, as we learn that, ooh, that didn't work. And so those comments are really good, and I'll definitely take those back. And so we'll to better understand that.
So is that gonna be a FirstNet policy that they're gonna make, is how the system's gonna be used, or is that something each county's gonna decide, or the state's gonna decide? Who's gonna decide who gets uplifted and who doesn't? Because if he comes in and he uplifts all his people, and then he does all his people, and then I do all my people, and who makes that decision? And who's gonna set that policy?
And those are things that need to be defined. You know, is it the incident commander? But the incident commander is too busy. It's going to be the comms chief back at the EOC. So that AT&T says, we'll give anybody priority as you tell us. And so now it's public safety. It gets to say, here's how we're going to use our network.
The other one would be under an ICS scenario, which they all should be. During the winter, my west I-70 corridor is prioritized. Okay? And so we have vehicles out there clearing blizzards, traffic accidents, people doing stupid stuff. We're out there clearing those highways. Okay? Roughly 6 months continuously between roughly now and April, early May. If we, and it's our infrastructure, if we don't have priority access, what's the point?
Well, so you will be today. You'd be a secondary, extended, primary user.
That's what I'm saying.
And you'd be able to subscribe.
Okay, but that's what I'm saying is that, why would I need to be extended? If it's my infrastructure, I'm the primary responder for that infrastructure. Why am I extended? Why should I pay $7.56 extra per user for that corridor? I have roughly 500 people on that corridor, in addition to other support assets. Why would I pay that? If it's my infrastructure, I'm the primary responder for that. That doesn't equate.
I mean, certainly.
I understand your dilemma, okay? Because transportation since 9/11 has always been in between a first responder and a non-first responder, okay? But now we have this concept of TIMS in play, traffic incident management, okay, which is a subset of NIMS that puts the owner of that infrastructure basically as the first responder for that infrastructure.
I think it's a fair point to bring up, and we'd certainly be interested to have further dialogue about that. But I think we want to make sure is where we're at in the evolving process, because we're in those first days of FirstNet, is trying to decide whether the state's going to try to build and interconnect into AT&T's FirstNet core, or whether AT&T is going to do that. I think the how questions are great, and those are ones that are very applicable when it comes to adoption, and we'd want to sit down and understand those requirements.
And just to add another layer of complication, where does hospitals fit in?
So there are some definitions.
So we could keep, that's all. I mean, that's where they've drawn the line now. They have expanded that. There is open for as we see a need or as public safety wants it. But that's where it is now. And so, and I look forward to continuing, like as Garrett said, continuing this dialogue and bringing this back. Right now, it's really, what are you going to tell the governor? Should he build it himself, or should we come in and offer it? So those opt-in states, those public safety are able to purchase that right now. So that's what Kim's done. Fabulous job, Kim, today, sharing all the different options and the content of it.
So
want to add quickly to your point. If you're out on your quarter, you got your 500 assets that are managing things, and there's not an accident, and there's no public safety that's out responding, you're already above anybody and everybody that's on the network. So you basically have that priority. Now you get, a complement of an engine, ambulance, and chief to come out to a call. Sure, they might be above you, but the network should be able to handle that influx of 3 to 4 to 5 users. So I think your concern will not be as much of a concern when you're out on that, because you're going to have priority over the general public based on the fact that you're already on the network as the first answer.
But Albert, I'm going to take your point back, because you bring up something we have thought of, and that's important here in Colorado, and I don't want you to think that it doesn't hurt.
I understand.
So, yeah.
Well, let me just offer this, because I can feel your pain. I mean, we actually call you out on calls. I took command I-70, so you've got a lot of people up I-70 corridor. There's a lot of traffic. We have about 6 or 7 cars that have spun out. They're in an accident. Well, one of those cars is CSP, and so we have to have you out there with your trucks, because not only do we need you to help mitigate, we need you to block for us. So in that incident, there was a lot of traffic, and I'm talking about on the LTE network. And so it is, what you're saying is very important, because we see more of that than not, in the last 2 years. So it is really important here in the state of Colorado.
I'm just excited that we have a network that's in place for the first time that can offer priority and preemption to multiple types of agencies, because before FirstNet, it was just public networks and it was difficult to get that. So the good news is we actually have the tools being put into place now, and now the discussion isn't moving, can we do it? We're now moving the discussion to how we can do it. And I think those are great use cases that we want to understand.
So Garrett, can I put you on the spot? Right now, without the SAN 14 in place, AT&T has the ability to offer priority and preemption to its customers. Would you agree with that?
That's complicated because of some fairness doctrines at the FCC and other things and such. But the great news is we're at a place now where AT&T has been awarded that contract. So rather than me trying to speculate back how we would act if we haven't won, what I can do is talk about how we can act when, since we have been awarded that contract. And so that allows us to be able to move forward and say, we have band class 14, we on the national contract, and as states begin to participate, we will be actively building that out and building a first responder network based on FirstNet's requirements.
So I'll answer that. FirstNet is, we feel very proud that because public safety really made this happen. And so the public safety is responsible for creating FirstNet so that they needed this interoperable communication system. It's also the final recommendation from the 9/11 Commission. So because of this, and because AT&T has stepped up and said, yeah, we'll open up our whole network, there's now competition. You're seeing a lot of other vendors that are saying, oh, we can do that, we can do that. Well, it took Congress, it took FirstNet to be created before that conversation could even happen. So overall, public safety really wins for different competitions, different services, and it'll just continue to get better.
And we're hearing competitors make claims that they're going to have products that are, quote, just as good. And the great news about this is that whether the state decides to opt in or opt out at an agency level, you're allowed to make your decisions on how you participate, whether that's CDOT or whether that's a county or whether that's a hospital or what have you. And so it's going to help drive the market to provide the solutions that are needed for first responders. And so we're going to be under both competitive pressure, because we have to still come and meet with every agency and make a case that what we have has better coverage or better capabilities or better capacity or better pricing or better service for that individual agency. When the state opts in, all we have is obligation, and then we have to go out there and our team and my team will have to go out there and make a case that we have a solution that'll be better for your agency.
A lot of oversight on AT&T, both from Congress, FirstNet, contractual versus also the public safety.
And this is going to be broadband, basically data network. It's not going to provide push to talk voice.
So the service it's a public safety wireless broadband network. So it's an IP-based wireless network. So think of it as a additional services are gonna be offered on top of that. Whether that's a push to talk over a cellular type, there'll be mission critical voice services that are added over time. And there
Any
will
time frame on that?
those are available in the state plan portal. If you don't have access, I would definitely encourage you to get access and look at that. But we're gonna start to see those over the next several years. We're not talking decades. And some of that testing is going on today in Boulder at the CTO lab, for FirstNet. And
The technology for mission critical push to talk over cellular isn't there right now, but it's being developed. So that's where we talk about this evolution of communication. You see, that's where it's going. But right now, it's providing that mission critical data to augment the mission critical voice that you have with your LMR. That's just the.
You could do push to talk today as an app, it's just not mission critical.
So it won't get priority.
No, it doesn't mean like, go officer out, officer down, it doesn't have that mission critical standard to have that clarity. You can't go device to device if the network's down.
Simplex.
So if you think of your LMR radio right now, that's a mission critical voice capability because of various things, like, emergency button activation, push to talk, which basically gives me a priority in the queue, and I'm sure to spot eventually, usually immediately. Sometimes it might be milliseconds later. Now they are taking some of those, what we consider mission critical capabilities, simplex capabilities, which in LTE is called proximity services, the ability to talk off network. They are taking those requirements that have been on public safety land mobile radio for decades, and they are working to put them in the international standards that support LTE. So it will be native capabilities to the network and not something that's just on an app, and if that app fails, you don't have that. But that's where Tracy's talking about it being a few years. They've been over the past 2 years baking in those standards version by version of the releases of LTE on international networks. You'll see a maturity of that over time, but if you don't trust it, you shouldn't use it. So that's why LMR is still really important.
Well, one of the criteria, what makes it mission critical, is that you can go device to device even if the network's down. And so right now, if I have a cell phone, we're right next to each other, and the network's down, I can't talk. So therefore, it's not mission critical. Whereas LMR, you can at least go device to device, even if the network's down.
That's Puerto Rico or proximity services in the LTE world that they're working on, that public safety has said, if you don't do that, this will never be mission critical.
Right.
There will be voice capabilities, so you think of it as a data network, but there are voice capabilities because there's voice over LTE capability. They'll be obviously supporting the ability to just have a voice conversation, that sort of thing.
Push to talk being different than mission critical push to talk.
Right.
And other services like WPS or GETS cards that you may be familiar with will work over the system as well as just what I would call traditional voice. You're going to be able to take a FirstNet phone and call your neighbor that has a Sprint device or has a landline with CenturyLink or whatever. It'll participate just like your normal cell phone.
Why would you need to worry about WPS in a FirstNet situation?
We are saying that it's supported from home.
No, I just been curious. Yeah, okay. Mark?
I'm sitting here looking at the opt-in screen up there, talking about the individual agreements. This is for opt-in and for opt-out. Will those individual agency agreements be a step above what the consumer one is to assure reliability and accountability for the public safety network?
So I can only speak to an opt-in scenario. We are already on the NASPO contract, which already has a higher degree of accountability than what you get on a consumer grade agreement today, and so you already have that type of agreement in place. And if there's special requirements you're looking for, and whoever buys services from AT&T, it is a contract negotiation, so you can always make asks and requirements, and we're going to tell you what we can and can't do. But do understand that we have requirements on a national level with federal FirstNet authority. So we have accountability both in your with the agency as well as with the federal government. And remember, our contract here is 25 years. Here, this contract under NASPO has no early termination fees. So if you're not happy with services, we have to continually earn your business, and you have the ability to walk away whenever you choose. And so we'll have market-based pressure as well.
You hear about 4 nines end-to-end reliability.
And in an opt-out situation, we wrote requirements in our RFP to address SLA relationships. We obviously wouldn't know what that is until we determine if there's a viable plan, but yeah. We actually referred to, LMR, SLAs, even in some of our documentation, you'll see, we'll pull out DTR, all of that stuff, and looking at those relationships, obviously, it's a little different, but yeah.
And that part of my question goes to the fact that we're not privy to the contract between FirstNet and AT&T and what their requirements are for uptime of the network. That comes back down to.
4.9's is up. 4.9's up.
But how do you measure it? I mean, that's.
I just want to make sure that we can have a spirited disagreement about what's in there, but we definitely do have a 4.9's reliability in our contract.
I would encourage you to request access to the portal.
He does.
Okay,
I had that already, and I'll reserve comments for that.
Okay, Chris. Can we just came back from Air Medical National Conference down in Fort Worth? My boss actually sat in on the first net, had a little inspection, and so I know her question to me when I come back and have my meeting with her at 1 o'clock is that the speaker indicated that Colorado was one of the few looking at an opt-out position, that she was curious as to why Colorado, and I understood what you said as far as looking at it very carefully, with the governor putting an eye on it. Is there any other reason that Colorado seems to be, he named Colorado by name, and so that's why she was kind of curious as to why we might be so. I don't know why we'd be called out by name, because there are 14 or 15 other states in an RFP process, or have been in an RFP process. 3 of those states have opted in subsequent to their RFPs, but there are quite a few states that are out there looking at their options. So I would say it's unfair to say Colorado is, one of the only ones. I think there's a lot doing their due diligence. Yeah. And for us, it's about, the coverage issue is really ensuring that, even in an opt-in situation, that we get the best possible network for people in as many places as possible over the life of the contract.
I can vouch that Kim and Sarah, Brian, the team is very passionate about getting what's best for Colorado, and they want to hear from you. So when I get calls, well, what about my area? Now, is that on the priority list? And so they want to hear from you. And so they're a pleasure to work with.
Anything else? Well, we kept you 15 minutes past the time. Thank you very much. Again, go out to our website, grab that checklist, look at it, ask us questions. We want to hear from you. Thank you.
And please sign the sheet if you haven't.
Hey, Kim,
Yes.
a couple of quick questions. One, on has the office or your personnel re-looked at our mutual aid with an EMAC request with mutual aid coming into Colorado and mutual aid going outside of Colorado?
So one of the requirements of an opt-out state would be to be interoperable with the nationwide network. So our network would have to effectively operate seamlessly with the FirstNet network in an opt-out situation. And I apologize, it's kind of getting loud. In an opt-in situation, the expectation is obviously it'd be a nationwide AT&T network, so it would be interoperable. From an app perspective, that would be key, where we understand apps and other capabilities adopted by agencies along borders and ensure that you guys know how each other are playing and that we aren't creating problems inadvertently because the apps can't talk to each other, as an example. So does that answer your question a little bit?
Because I know Brian earlier comments was New York never comes to Colorado. We just do a lot of interactive. And I'll get off of that. And did you get Elbert squared away so he knows the next time we burn his highway, that will uplift him.
Yes. I don't think he'll like that answer, but I'll pass it on. Does anyone else on the phone have any questions? Well, thank you all, and we're gonna end the phone bridge as well, and we'll be sending out, if you go to our YouTube page, this will all be available on demand if you need to listen to it again. Thank you.
Kim, great job.
Thank you.
So one of the things I always